Homestuck is a webcomic I was aware of during my time on the early internet. Honestly, my first introduction to the series was this fan parody of We Didn't Start the Fire, which was uploaded by Mad Megatax on July 1st, 2012. I ran into this video during my teen years, and while I didn't understand the context of everything, it did pique my interest. Eventually, I ended up reading Homestuck for a bit, but then I stopped. I liked what I read a lot, but I guess the long length of Homestuck was a bit intimidating for me, given it is one of the longest literary works ever. Homestuck has more words than the King James Bible, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and all 5 books of A Song of Ice and Fire. I remember at least reading part of the first act of the series. I like the simplistic but unique art style, the zany crass humor, and I liked what I read of the main character of the series, John Egbert, as I found his love of bad movies funny and endearing. I also loved the side content on the site MS Paint Adventures, like the comic Sweet Bro and Hella Jeff, which in canon was created by the character Dave Strider. It wasn't until recently I revisited the series and I was able to finish the first act. Honestly, reading it now made me very nostalgic, with it featuring things of the early internet like Pester Chum, an in-universe version of instant messaging software the characters of the story used to communicate with. I also like the inclusion of old technology of the time, like the PDA that belongs to John's father. The webcomic is oozing with charm, and I definitely intend on finishing it. The reason I started reading Homestuck again was because news broke about a pilot for an animated series. You'd think a lot of people would be excited for this pilot, given the fact it would reignite an old fandom. However, when the trailer hit the net, people were upset when it was announced who was involved with making it, that being Vivziepop, the creator of Has Been Hotel and Hell of a Boss. The discourse surrounding this pilot's announcement honestly was really annoying. Rather than look into the actual showrunner of the series or the director involved with the show, fans were complaining about how Vivziepop would ruin it. I get not everyone likes the Hellaverse and its humor, but here's the thing, she is not a writer nor a director on the show whatsoever. The original creator of the webcomic, Andrew Hussey, is still involved, and Vivzi simply is producing the pilot and using one of her studios in Australia, that being Spindleroo, to animate it. Honestly, this is all I really have to say about the discourse. Personally, I think it was unnecessary, and I wish people would do more research into things rather than assume the worst every time a trailer for a cartoon comes out. When I saw the Homestuck pilot trailer, it made me realize that if it were to be greenlit for a series, there would be so much potential. Personally, I was very optimistic about it, unlike the rest of the internet. The cast was stacked with a lot of recognizable voice actors in the main cast. I recognize names like Jeremy Lee, who voices Rose Lalonde, Adam MacArthur, who voices Dave Strider, and Colleen O'Shaughnessy, who voices Jade Harley. The most surprising of all of them to me, though, was Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale and Deltarune, as John Egbert. So, to be fair though, Toby has a history with Homestuck, with him being a composer of music for the comic, and he's voiced the character John in the past. After the announcement of the pilot, I was highly anticipating how unique of an adaptation this would be. Comic books to animation is something audiences have seen done before. However, I haven't heard of many webcomic animated adaptations.
Mark this day in the history books, for today, LEGO Star Wars 2 hits the shelves. Barry, I believe you have a copy of LEGO Star Wars for me.
I mean a good webcomic animated adaptation. Given the long length of Homestuck, it reminded me of another long piece of fiction that got its own animated series, that being If turned into a series, Homestuck could end up being the indie animation equivalent of that. Like with Invincible, a comic series with multiple issues, being animated it would end up being an easier entry point to the franchise. Essentially, like with that comic book animated adaptation, you could watch a season of Homestuck and enjoy it. Then if you crave more of the story, you could read through the webcomic itself to get the full narrative before the next season drops. Speaking of the webcomic, it is officially back online as of September 27th, the day the pilot dropped. Well, guess I don't need to use the unofficial browser anymore. So, how is the Homestuck pilot? I watched it as soon as it came out, and honestly, it was really good. The pilot adapts the beginning of Act 1, and it definitely is a faithful adaptation based on what I read. The opening of the pilot is faithful, as is the majority of it, with the first joke of the series still intact, with John being called Zeus Mel Poop Lord at the start. The pilot takes place on John Egbert's birthday and focuses on him trying to retrieve the Spurb Beta while avoiding his dad. The two end up fighting a bit, lots of cakes were thrown, but at the end he retrieves the Beta. However, in this adaptation of Homestuck, some changes were made. These changes, however, are not bad and benefit the pilot, as it is a very different medium from a webcomic. Rather than solely use Pester Chum to communicate, the characters use cell phones. This change makes a lot more sense as animation is a visual and audio medium. It also fits the time period of the series as they're using flip phones rather than their computers, which makes sense since voice chat sites like Discord were not a big thing back then. Pester Chum is relegated to an Easter egg on Rose's computer, which makes sense as it fits a webcomic medium better than a show because there is a lot of text to read. Honestly, the new cell phone aspect is great for the show since it allows the audience to see and hear the cast of characters. At the webcomic start, we did not see the faces of all of John's friends, but rather just colored text representing each character. In the pilot, however, we are able to see and hear his friends Dave Strider, Rose Lalonde, and Jade Harley. Not much is shown of them in the pilot, but I enjoyed their appearances as their personalities really shine despite the small amount of screen time they all had. Dave in the pilot comes off to me as loud, cocky, and self-absorbed, yet still cool. One aspect of his character that stood out to me was when he mocked John for choosing a hammer as a weapon.
Well, I only had a hammer, so...
Hammer guy for life!
Wait,
Oh,
what?
you like hammers, dude?
I really like his samurai sword, along with his room, which has a turntable and sweet bro and hella Jeff art on his wall. Rose, on the other hand, comes off more calm and reserved. A standout moment between her and John is when they talk about Dave Strider.
I'm not saying bro is hard on the eyes or anything, and we all have our moments of weakness, but... shit! What was I saying?
I think you are about to confess something to me, John.
Another interesting moment with her character is when she has a hunch John's wearing a silly disguise, something she's clearly been aware of him doing before in the past. Finally, there's Jade, who has a very bubbly personality. She gets the least amount of screen time, but she calls John asking him if he got her present. Finally, one thing I was pondering about the Homestuck pilot was how they'd introduce the troll characters. I haven't read up to the point where they're introduced yet, but the one troll that was teased was Carcat Ventus. He was teased in all the promotional material. However, he is at the very end of the pilot and is simply a tease for what's to come, along with the future adventures we see the Homestuck cast go on in the Spurb game.
That's it? One line?
Overall, I really enjoyed the pilot. It was not bad by any means, and I was not bothered by the cursing whatsoever. While someone may argue that VivziePop added that in, that is inaccurate as swearing already existed in Homestuck. Not only that, but the characters are teenagers, so the swearing makes sense for the story being told. Although I have heard criticism that there were more swears in the pilot than there was in the start of Homestuck, so yeah, yeah, I get why that may have upset some people. I get not everyone likes Hazman Hotel or Hell of a Boss, but this series is only funded by Vivzy Pop and animated by one of her studios. The pilot did end up being faithful to the source material, even though there was some additional swearing. Honestly, I overall really liked the pilot, and I think the internet overreacted at least a bit. In conclusion, I hope Homestuck becomes a full series. Like I said earlier, this could be the Invincible of webcomic adaptations. I am curious if this show will be on YouTube, or if, like with other Vivzy Pop shows, it will be picked up by Amazon. Only time will tell, but this pilot definitely motivated me to continue reading the webcomic before then. This has been Shade X, and I hope you all feel nothing but good vibes.